as one does, preparing for a panel on generative AI. I used ChatGPT to prepare for this panel. So it's actually quite interesting. So I asked it, I am the host of a panel discussion on the impact of generative AI on writing and literature. Help me prepare, find me interesting facts to mention, make sure they're real and not hallucinated, and insightful questions to ask. And it actually gave me a bunch of questions, which I'm going to ask these people now. All right, so on that note, feel free to basically, interrupt anyone. Just let's have a conversation where we don't just all agree with each other. I think I want some furious disagreements on this sort of contentious topic. So Anil, as someone who's been living and breathing the AI space and so on, right?
Sort of.
The last 1 year has been mind-bogglingly fast in terms of developments, right? Just to put things in perspective, we were just discussing about how it took 200 years after the printing press for Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution to happen. But it kind of feels like the jokes that we made about the first wave of mistakes that ChatGPT made, 6 to 9 months ago, to what GPT-4 is now capable of. So my first question to you is sort of bring us up to speed on where this technology is actually going, to sort of set the stage on, before we discuss, literature and writing. Where is the state of the art when it comes to AI?
You mean the overall space of it?
You could sort of restrict it to the context of, at least creative writing and so on.
Right. So let's talk about large language models, right? So when I think almost everyone remembers the era before ChatGPT and the era after ChatGPT. It's like something changed in those few weeks. Like you said, when ChatGPT came out, while people were really amazed at what it was capable of doing, it was also very clear that it was capable of making some very serious mistakes, and people really doubted how good it's going to get. And within a very short amount of time, so ChatGPT, when it came out, was based on a base model called GPT 3.5. And now you have GPT-4, which just was 6 months later. And suddenly all the concerns that we had, not all the concerns, but a lot of the concerns that we had about the earlier version are out of the window. Now we are seeing capabilities in these models that are just breathtaking, and it is still prone to error, it still hallucinates and all those things. But it is beginning to display a kind of creativity that, at least for writers, is a little frightening. And I think, again, like we discussed a little bit earlier, that people probably are underestimating just how quickly this is going to accelerate and how quickly this technology is going to feed upon itself in terms of how it enables companies to build better versions of these models. And, I would say within 1 year from now, or 1.5 to 2 years from now, what we are talking about now will be completely sort of old news, and we'll be talking about something very dramatically different.
Yeah, it's actually interesting because I think it's almost as if all the criticism of generative AI right now is almost always criticism of yesterday's version. That's how fast things are moving. So Gautam, your thoughts on use of AI in writing and creativity in general?
Yeah, so I think that this fright about AI is quite old. There's a very, perhaps somewhat lesser known short story by Roald Dahl called The Great Automatic Grammatizer, which is actually about this. So they invent a machine that is able to write a novel based on a plot line you feed it, a set of parameters, an emotional novel about X or Y. And Roald Dahl shows us the process of inventing that machine. And then it comes to a point where every living writer has to promise to never write a word again to the company owning the machine. Then they will be taken care of for the rest of their lives. But if they try to compete with the machine, they can't. And that's how the story ends. And this is quite a while ago. So this is something that's been on people's minds for a long time. And of course, Roald Dahl with his black humor, was the first to see it. Though I think that's the bleak view. I think there's one very interesting way in which it's put to use, and that's in a book called The Salvage Crew by Udhanjaya Vijayaratna, a Sri Lankan science fiction writer. In The Salvage Crew, there is an AI as a character, and this AI wants to write poetry. This AI loves writing poetry. And what Udhanjaya does in the book is that whenever the AI is speaking or trying to write poetry, those parts are AI generated. So it's almost like he's written a novel in collaboration with AI, and where the AI is a character, there you get AI generated stuff, and the rest is his. So I think that's the optimistic way you can put AI to use.
Yep, absolutely. We will but we will quickly jump to the publisher's point of view. Kanishka, your thoughts on what you've been seeing over the last year?
I don't know why there's so much fuss about AI in literature at a time when we should be concerned about finding new readership for books by like non-AI writers. So I'm in the thick of publishing. I get lots of queries and submissions from authors, first-time writers, like writers who've written books in the past. I haven't come across any AI-generated queries, nor have authors sought my advice on, AI-generated proposals.
I think they're using and not telling you.
No. And I think it just defeats the whole purpose of, like writing, I don't think AI can replace creative impulse or, like creative impetus. So, I mean, I may be restricting my views to literary writing and literary nonfiction. But even if you look at the way in which AI is replicating or trying to emulate the greats, I mean, you see all these, like Facebook posts by writers and Twitter posts by writers who share their experiences of, like getting AI to, rewrite something, some famous lines in the words of like some other writers. I really don't feel that we should be giving so much importance to AI and literature. And why would anyone invest in AI and literature when the stakes are so low? I mean, will an AI-generated book start selling more than 5,000 copies? We should focus on increasing the readership. And then this is my third panel, AI and literature panel in 3 months. And I think even the panel has been generated by AI because...
Yes. No, but okay, so let me maybe sort of provocatively ask you this, right? Which is that one of the things about AI is, like many other disruptive technologies in the past, this is the first time skill is democratized. Right? Again, as I said, if you look at 1 year ago, nobody felt that ChatGPT could write a novel. Okay? But any serious person using some of the state-of-the-art models now should be seriously worried about the level of creativity it can generate. So to your point about will an AI-generated book sell 5,000 copies? One, I'm pretty certain that the smartest authors probably already use AI as part of their workflow. That's number one. Number two, it's possible today that there's a finite number of human beings who are capable of writing literary fiction at the quality of Salman Rushdie or someone like that. And then there's a range of books varying in spectrum of quality and so on. Maybe AI can be used to generate and plug a whole range of gaps, not perhaps at the quality of a Rushdie, but maybe a little bit less, maybe a little bit better than what they get today.
So I think there are certain genres to that AI might be better suited to, like your very plot-driven books, sci-fi, fantasy. You spoke about how AI can be used for like generating like new styles and formats. I mean, I really don't feel that much has been done. I don't think it's an important consideration right now.
Tashan, what do you feel about creativity and AI in general?
I think to me, art bifurcates. You can talk about art as a product. That's the art that exists in the market. And that's the art that we often talk about when we discuss AI. You're going to create a novel. It's going to compete in the market. It's going to be as good as a human-created novel. But I think what's interesting to me is Kanishka's right. It's a zero-stakes game, right? So at some point, you're kind of peeling back the layers of why do you write? Why are we all sitting here and why are we putting down words on the page? And it's not to get the next literary bestseller, although that would be very nice. I mean, the chances of those are 1 in 100. It is an extremely human act of trying to understand yourself and the questions in your life through the act of writing. And that isn't the final product. The final product ends up being packaged well and disseminated into the world, but it's the process of doing it that actually remakes you as a writer.
There are hundreds of thousands of people who now have very deep relationships with chatbots. They are deeply moved. It sometimes has a positive and negative, sometimes positive effects on their mental health and so on. People have relationships. People have synthetic spouses and girlfriends now. The tech is getting better. So to that point about the relationship with the reader, right? Who is to say that there wasn't some piece of technology that played a role in that eventually happening? Did it all come from the human brain?
So I think this is really interesting, isn't it? Because I think what you're still looking at it beyond the process. You're looking at that product. The chatbot is already done. The reader is there on the other end, and you're having that human relationship. I'm interested in the bit where you sit down on the blank page and you type it out. I'm interested in that part, the part where your brain has to process the world around you through multiple drafts and through language in order to sort of sharpen your own experience of it. It's an extremely egocentric view that I'm putting forward right now. I'm sort of pulling back from this idea of you can create 1,000 Rushdie novels. I'm asking why. Exactly as Kanishka is asking, why? What is the point?
Right.
Many writers don't even know where their book or drafts are headed, you know. Some of them, have an idea for a short story. They write that short story and then they, take a break, and a few months down the line, they feel that perhaps this could be expanded into a novella or a novel. Can AI do that? I mean, that's the question, you know.
You'd be surprised.
It's a very intuitive and instinctive thing, writing.
Yes. So maybe I think let's bring...
I want to add
Yes.
something to what you're saying. I kind of agree with you that the process of writing, for most of us who became writers, we wanted to do it because we wanted to pay attention to the world. We wanted to understand something about ourselves. And I think what will happen when AI starts producing, let's say mediocre literature, whatever it might be, or AI starts showing us that, and this is something you've been alluding to indirectly, that we might be doing things within ourselves that are actually very similar to what we are seeing happening in LLMs, in large language models, right? So when large language models give us a window into what we are, then the creative process that we indulge in as humans trying to write to understand ourselves, I think it just moves the bar. We'll have to work harder at trying to figure out what the hell we are relative to this machine we have invented, which seems to do things just as well. And so the existential questions still remain. They become sharper. They probably have more clarity. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's beautiful. That's the conversation I would much rather
Exactly,
have about
exactly.
AI, on how we can either collaborate with it or talk to it to understand our own humanness and push the boundaries. Instead, the conversation that seems to be happening often is, will it replace us? Or, what is the market going to do? Or how are capitalistic structures going to survive post the AI revolution? And I think I'm far more curious on, how does this remake us? How does it become a mirror that changes how we understand ourselves? I think that's beautiful.
Yep. I think, so Gautam, I think one thing I wanted to ask you, right? So one is when Charles Dickens, someone wrote, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, right? It's considered one of the most amazing opening lines of any book, right? And over the last 200 years, people have said that it takes some sort of spark of individual human genius to be able to come up with a line like that. Now, you sort of fast forward to an author post, say, in 2005 or something. They're probably using Google search as a way of researching the stuff that they do. A tool that was so path-breaking and groundbreaking that authors before them did not have. Did authors, after using Google, become less of an author as a result of using the tool? And to that end, using AI as an assistant, if you will, in this creative process of writing, is that simply not just another tool?
Yeah, no, I tend to agree. So it's interesting you say that, because there's that famous Borges story, Pierre et Menard, where you rewrite Don Quixote, right? So, and each time you rewrite it, it's the same book, but it's still different, because when you've rewritten it, it's the context, where the audience, all of that changes, right? So in that sense, that same line would mean very different things, across the years. But yeah, I think there have always been things that have, helped. So for example, if, so everyone will laugh at this, but say rhymer.com for poetry, right? Sometimes you're stuck, if you're stuck on a rhyme,
Yep.
right? Obviously, you will not say, okay, rhymer.com has given me these 5 rhymes. I will pick, X or Y, but it does help in that way. So I think in that sense, when you're stuck in writing, say if you want to, there are all these great name generators for fantasy and science fiction, right? You're really stuck. You need a name for character.
Yeah.
You want a placeholder name just to move on, right, with the novel.
Yeah.
It helps, right? So I think in that sense, yeah, there are many ways in which you can collaborate with AI. I think one interesting data point I'll just give to you. So I edit a science fiction magazine, and the debate has been quite strong in the magazine space. And many magazines have banned, or they've said, look, you must disclose that you wrote this with AI. And if you find out you were lying, then your story will be, you'll be blacklisted. So I proposed, I said, should we have this for our magazine as well? And interestingly, the department most in favor of having this rule was non-fiction. The department who did not want it was poetry, because they had found that in poetry was where people were doing fascinating things with AI and, form and structure.
So this is, the reason this is interesting is that a Google search is AI. It has been deep learning since 2011. Okay. So it's not as if when you're using Google search or you're using anything on your phone, you are, of course, using AI all the time, right? I mean, it is only when suddenly, all of a sudden, it seems to speak natural language in a reasonably convincing way that people now have now we need to figure out how to, control. So let me ask a very pointed question here, right? Which is the whole Charles Dickens point, right? Which is that what is to say that the person who came up with that line, we sort of keep hearing the issues of plagiarism and the fact that these large language models have been trained on everybody else's books without their consent, and they're merely parroting, things that they have seen in their training data, and they're not actually generating anything new. We'll discuss that separately. But do human beings, everything they say, is that original? I mean, who's to say that Charles Dickens did not hear this phrase somewhere from a school teacher in the 1800s, and it just stuck with him, and his neural network somehow brought it up when he wanted to write? And that's what many of these large language models might be doing.
Legal implications on Charles Dickens? I mean, he's no longer there. Is there anyone to say to the contrary? In AI-generated literature, there is a huge issue about, ownership of expression, ownership of copyright. So, I mean, there's nothing in that in the Charles Dickens story or the lines that suggests that it was not it was inspired by someone. So
Anil, do you want to sort of speak about the whole creativity part?
Yeah, I think this has serious implications going forward as to how we view what these large language models are doing, right? If until about maybe 6 months ago, there was this phrase which became very popular to describe large language models, that they are what are called stochastic parrots, which basically means that they're essentially regurgitating information, albeit in very complex ways, but information that they've already seen before somehow, right? And if that's always going to be true, then copyright laws and legalities have a certain kind of import, right? But now with GPT-4, we've come to a point where it can be mathematically shown that it's possible for GPT-4 to understand and generate text in ways that it could not have possibly seen in the training data, right? So suddenly we are in a regime where these models have gotten so complex and so big and so powerful that you can literally show that the likelihood of them having seen the information they produce in the training data is almost next to nothing, right? And that, depending on how you define creativity, that is one form of creativity.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure how legal cases are going to be fought when this can be proven to be true, right? So this is going to play out in courts all over the world now.
So I want to ask Tashan and Gautam to comment on this particular thing, right, from two perspectives. Let's sort of, if you look at some of the things that Anil has said and what Kanishka has said as well. One is that these models are far more sophisticated than most people understand, and they're getting better really, really fast. They are exhibiting emergent properties that we're still continuing to understand and research, right? So in that sense, is there a deeper existential question to ask? Like how, when the printing press was invented, scribes became irrelevant. or let's put it this way, the economic importance of a scribe became less important. I mean, they still did artisanal work, right? But most books ended up being printed and so on. Just like certain category of companies became obsolete when the internet came into being. We all personally, I think people in my father's generation knew how to read a map. Now we don't. If it doesn't exist on Google Maps, that place doesn't exist, right? I mean, it's sort of become like that. So we've clearly have black boxed that skill of navigating around the world, looking, I mean, if you go back a little bit, you have to look at east, west, constellations, navigating at night, and all of that stuff. Nobody now knows those things. Are we perhaps at that stage, or at least the start of that stage, for writing in general as a creative expression? Are we perhaps overvaluing it to the point where we might need to say, you know what, I think AI can do some really amazing work. So the definition of what human creativity now has to change. Do you think that's true, or what do you feel?
I think you're spot on there. I do think that when AI creativity steps in, we'll just change the idea of creativity, like we've done with intelligence. When we say artificial intelligence, we just sort of like, nobody thinks today that a calculator is AI, right? It does excellent math, but we see it as a tool. Nobody says that's a sign of intelligence and a calculator is smarter than a human being. We just changed the definitions. It just became fluid. But I find also, I think in a lot of these conversations, we conflate things. So when you talk about Google Maps, or when you talk about the printing press, we see these as tools. I think AI is far closer to photography. When photography came out, or the camera came out, there was this huge conversation of, it's going to replace painting, and like it takes pictures so much better, and it's real life, and it's anchored. But painting just changed, right? And photography deepened into its own kind of art. They're not all equal, all sorts of photographers, right? So I think AI is probably leading down a path that's similar in that sense of complexity. I feel like this replacement conversation is curious and interesting, but I feel like it's sidestepping the complexity in which we all tend to evolve and society tends to evolve.
Gautam, your thoughts?
I think there are two very interesting points there. So one is, I think that there is sometimes a conflation between creativity and individualism, right? So this whole idea of the individual writer who creates that work is an invention of the Romantic period in European history. And Chinua Achebe, in one of his essays, actually says that among the Igbos, there is no concept of the individual author. Yeah. So if you have a sculpture, it is the community who has created the sculpture, because whenever you create, you're obviously drawing upon all these influences. So your Charles Dickens question, right? So I think that in that sense, and when you say the AI now is trained on data that you cannot isolate or trace back to a specific training set, I think that actually again takes you back to that old idea of, is there such a thing as the individual writer, or is all creativity effectively based on what we get from the communities around us, right? So that's one thing. The second thing on replacement, and I think that there's a very, very interesting book that came out recently called Blood in the Machine, which is a history of the Luddites. And what they tell you is that the Luddites their problem was not with the machine. In fact, they used machines to make them, work better and create better products. Their problem was that the people who control the machines used them in ways to deprive them of agency. The Luddites, right? And so when they broke machines, they weren't rebelling against machines, but against how the economic structure was using the machines. I think similarly here, right? The issue is not AI replacing writers, but who controls the AI and what use they would do in the overall economy. I think that's the real question.
That's true. I think it's also a deeper question about things like basic income and all the other things that as jobs will go away and so on.
I think AI should be used for some of the less, creative sides and sides to publishing, like maybe, I don't know about sales, but maybe marketing, social media. So, I mean, it can help and assist in those things. And you were talking about, writers using, Google search and everything, but writers have been using tools like Scrivener and other tools also just to organize their thoughts into a narrative now. Whether or not that can be qualified as, AI generated, output, I don't know. But I think there are ways in which AI can be used in publishing. It cannot be writing, like the writing of the book.
Okay. So let me maybe one last question, and then we'll maybe take questions from the audience, which I'm assuming people have very interesting questions. Right. So if 5 years from now, would you use every AI tool that you have at your disposal to be able to write and publish a book? And do you foresee a publisher saying, nah, this is not acceptable because do you see that happening at all? Sort of more, a little bit of stargazing here.
You mean, are you asking whether I'll do it? Or?
So whether you'll do it and how do you predict the publisher will react? Then we'll get the publisher to
I
react
think
as well.
personally for me, writing is about what we were talking about earlier, that it is really an exploration for my own sake. So if AI becomes ubiquitous in our world and it kind of starts shedding light on the very essence of what it means to be human, that just changes the things I think about. But I'll still hopefully stick to wanting to do that for myself, right? But saying that, look, everything we do finally is also about economics.
Yep.
So if AI starts impacting that aspect of any profession, it's going to start, people are going to start using it. And I don't see why in 5 years there won't be a whole lot of writers.
Yep.
Especially people who are growing up now and who are seeing this as very normal, right?
Yeah. They're using it for school. They're using it for homework at school. So why would they not use it? Yeah.
So it might be a very different world in 5 years for a certain set of writers. So I think publishers will have to be on their toes if that's not what they want. But I also feel that there will be publishers who will be just fine with it.
Exactly.
Right? So it'll cut any which way. So we'll see how it pans
Completely
out.
AI native publishers. They'll only publish AI. Right?
Potentially.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, so I think that the future you're talking about is already here in book covers, right? So right now the whole controversy is that if a book cover is generated by AI, the book cover art, is that ethical and is that acceptable? And some publishers have said we will not do that, and some have done that. And among writers and buyers, consumers, there is a debate: should we buy those books? I think you will see something similar for the writing itself.
Right.
Some publishers will say take a stand, say no. Some will say yes, and there'll be a similar division among writers and people who buy.
I think all this conversation is very much in the realm of speculation. We need AI-related or driven disruption in the publishing industry for us to take it seriously. Maybe like a group of IIT, IIM graduates setting up a AI-generated publishing house and publishing AI-generated books, and then they keep getting funding from like VCs and start publishing AI-generated books, and they start competing with the Penguins and the HarperCollins of the world. Then maybe we should take this seriously.
So basically, the market will dictate whether. Yeah, all right. Yes.
I think I don't know. I'm a speculative fiction author, so the number one thing I know is to never predict the future because it never goes well. I think it depends on how AI evolves, because from where I'm sitting right now, there's nothing I can see that would work with my process. So it depends on how that technology changes and whether it does become a mirror to our humanness and whether it does push the boundaries of the art. I do think publishing will move towards AI to a certain degree. It just depends on how we define power structures from here on and how we sort of direct the flow of the future. So I think honestly it's in our hands to a large extent. That's giving us a lot more power than we really have. But
All right. So I'll close with my take on where I think this is going. I think it'll go the same way as the distinction between mass-produced goods and artisanally handcrafted, homemade furniture, organic, grown in my backyard kind of food. I think there will be a market for both. There will be very rich people posturing on Instagram that I don't read AI-generated books. I only read artisanal, organic, homemade books and so on. I think that will happen. But ultimately, I do think a big spectrum of that will be human beings using AI, just like they used Google or they used libraries 2,000 years ago when they were invented, to do what we do, which is creative expression.
But I do see human writers taking a lot of inspiration from AI and using AI as a theme in their books.
Absolutely.
Cross genre. That's what's going to happen.
Very much. All right. So on that note, I think let's do Q&A. Yes. Oh, lots of questions. So I think the first hand that went up was the gentleman right there. Yes. Okay.
So fiction is about creativity, inner process, understanding. Non-fiction is about unearthing historical facts and putting them together to synthesizing them in a new way that provides a new perspective on the world. And no human is ever going to be able to do that as well as a machine. archives can be combed better than by machines by anybody else. So therefore, is non-fiction the genre that is most under threat, and will it cease to exist from human hands? Will it be taken over by AI?
Fantastic question. Yeah.
AI
Go ahead,
cannot
yes.
go and do reporting. Non-fiction is not just historical non-fiction. And a lot of the material which is available online, a lot of it is behind paywall. It requires subscription. So I'm not even sure if AI has access to that.
It will.
But it doesn't
Don't worry,
have
it
it
will.
yet,
It
yeah.
will.
But
yes.
what about your...
So just as a fun
what
fact,
about reportage?
I understand. A fun fact, one of the ongoing controversies is that there's a famous torrent file called books3.torrent, which is basically some 200,000 books which are pirated and so on. It is gossip that many of the LLMs used that torrent to say libgen and so on. This is an of course, they have not said they have, but this is at least what is the speculation. So access and paywall are very not likely to be issues for the companies that now control these models. They're wealthy enough to be able to make that happen. So to that end, do you think that will?
I agree with you. I think those paywalls will go at some point because these companies have very deep pockets.
Yeah.
We're talking billions and billions, right? But I also want to kind of address this issue of the difference between fiction and non-fiction. I really don't think non-fiction should be thought of as a non-creative. I mean, it's even for non-fiction writers, creativity is very much a part of their writing process. So the reason that they write non-fiction is also for the same reasons that a fiction writer might want to. It's just that what they're writing about is very different, right? So those challenges still remain for the writers, whether you are a non-fiction writer or a fiction writer. Some aspects of what you said will be true, like AI will be able to generate, I think, like, I'm a science journalist, so I can very easily see the formulaic stories that come out about, advancements in science being completely automated. It's such a template-driven process that, the reporting of it, the writing of it, those things will go. But there will be aspects of non-fiction writing that will still remain the purview of writers because they are doing it for themselves. And I think that's the key thing to keep in mind, that when writers are doing it for themselves, it doesn't matter what the AI is going to say or do.
See, I think, one point I'll make about that, right? So non-fiction, the workflow of writing a non-fiction, of looking at all the archives, forming all the connections, getting all the factual things right, creating that narrative, I think it will make the process of writing non-fiction significantly faster. It may require fewer research interns and so on. But if you ask me, right, there's this book called The Body by Bill Bryson, right? There's one of the lines in that this thing is his conversation with a doctor where he says that, he removes less than a millimeter sliver of skin with forceps from a dead body. And he says that this is less than a few millimeters thick, right? This is outer epidermis, is where all your skin color and melanin and everything lies, right? So this sliver is where all skin color, once you remove this, everyone is the same shade of pink. And this sliver is where all racism exists, right? So that phrase is a very human choice. It's something that, it's a conversation that he chose to highlight amongst the thousands of things he may have spoken to. So that editorial choice and that creative choice of figuring out what to write, I think is still going to be a very human thing. So at least that's my point.
And there's that great book by E.H. Carr, What is History, where he distinguishes between the facts and then the historical meaning. So the AI can very efficiently comb the archives, but the historical meaning that you give to what you find there is still a choice, which is made by human beings.
Yeah. Yes, next question.
Hi. So this question is for the whole panel. So recently, after OpenAI Day, Amazon saw a rise in, out of 16 of the bestsellers, 20 of the bestsellers, 16 were AI generated. And after that, what they did was they restricted sort of everyday author restrictions of 3 per day.
Yes.
So do you think the next step for such giant publishing house like Kindle and others such go into the much deeper sense of reviewing the book and searching those keywords where are auto-generated or AI-generated and sort of kick them out, or have a separate sort of store for them? Or what do you think this future lies?
So you can go first.
I think I agree with what he said, which is what will happen is that you will then have a distinction, and the human work will be that artisanal kind of work.
Yeah.
And,
So, and the other point is that I think people are also, right now, again, it's the same problem with generative AI and large language models, is that everyone is still processing yesterday's updates. It is moving so fast, right? So, in fact, one of the things, for example, when you want to test the quality, accuracy of one large language model, right now, the technique we use is to use another large language model. So, so many large language models are benchmarked on the basis of GPT-4, for example, right? So what's going to happen is that it's only a matter of technical ability, where at some point of time, Amazon and the likes will put in place a generative AI solution to review, check, and automatically approve these things. Because right now, they're saying no because they have to use human beings to do it. And the moment they have the AI way to do it, then it'll become its own thing. And to his point, yes, it'll be a separate category. It'll be AI-generated fiction.
And it'll also be an arms race, literally. This is happening. Like AI, generative AI, when it generates content, and then you have AIs to detect the generative content, they are both playing off each other. One is getting smarter, the other will get smarter, and it'll keep shifting.
Yeah.
So it'll never be an equilibrium.
Correct. And I also predict that entire books written by AI, other people will use AI to write counter books to argue against all the points that were written here, like how they do in politics, right? So this will also happen. Yes.
I'm also very curious about AI-generated works, full-length books, passed off as like books written by human writers, and the interaction with human editors, you know, because that's also a very creative, intuitive process, and the editors also keep changing their minds about the book, and on second reading, they may find more problems with it, or they may feel that some of the problems they had pointed out in a book no longer exists. How is like an author of an AI-generated book, how will he like survive this process? So
It's going to be interesting.
how
So
are they going to promote the book? Like,
no, maybe the
At
really
JLF or
blunt and
ELF,
candid answer is that maybe that won't matter. Right? There may be a category of books that are actually genuinely enjoyed by people where that special relationship that you speak about may not matter.
I think let's make a distinction between content and books. Huh? This is the distinction that needs to be made. Huh?
All right, yes, next question, yes.
Hi, my name is Kyra, and my question is regarding the future of, say, homework in college applications, because you tend to write a lot of essays. Will teachers stop asking for essays, thinking that students might just take them from AI? Or so, what's your point of view on that?
I think that's an excellent question. I think it depends on how our relationship with AI evolves, whether we start seeing AI as usurpers of human thought and therefore replacing human thought, or whether we see it as a collaboration and whether it's just helping you better express yourself and say what you need to say. I do know that there's been a lot of experiments run currently with homework and AI, and it's not up to par, but as he says, that may very well change. So I think everything is on that brink of we don't know. What that future is going to look like really depends on where we go from here and what direction we take.
See, I think the other point is that, so people think it's a binary, that either you use AI or only human, right? I mean, the best combination is going to be the right mix of human plus AI, right? So even in chess, right, human using a bunch of grandmasters using the right set of software do far better than just AI or just human beings. So one more thing that's going to happen by the time, as we get there on a lighter note, is that right now what we see is that a lot of universities and schools starting to say no point of homework, because I think you can now chat GPT your homework. So it'll be more in-person assignments. So that's what they're trying to do.
You're actually right, because I was teaching a course last term, and the course ended. I wanted the examination to be an essay, because it was an sort of seminar course.
Yeah.
The university said no chance. I said, can it be a take-home exam? They said no chance. Has to be an in-person, in-class, handwritten exam. Anything else will be ChatGPT. So they didn't allow me to assign an essay or a take-home exam, and I had to actually sit in class like an invigilator and here write it out. So
yes.
It's
interesting because last week I was in the US and I saw one of the hottest selling products is Meta's new smart glasses. Okay, and they come in both, like they're Ray-Ban made, so they're shades as well, but you can also get like regular spectacles like this. The beautiful thing is that they actually do through bone conduction. They also get right into your ear, so you can listen to music, etc., etc. So there are already GitHub projects that are going to use large language models. So, well, it's going to do voice recognition and whisper the answer that you need to give in your ears. So if you're speaking about in-person assignments, maybe even that's not a great idea at some point of time, unless you do some sort of a X-ray scanning to see that you're not using any devices.
Just stop exams altogether, basically. That's
Till, of
the
course,
idea.
Musk implants Neuralink inside our brain at that point, yes.